The cameras flashed. The world cheered. A radiant bride, a rock and roll king, and the perfect fairy tale wedding. At least that's what they wanted us to believe. But behind those glittering smiles and champagne toasts, something was terribly wrong. Just hours before walking down the aisle, Elvis Presley sat in silence, eyes swollen, whispering 5 devastating words that no one was ever supposed to hear. What happened in that hidden moment shattered the illusion and changed everything. Stay with us, because the truth behind that day will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. The glossy black and white wedding photos painted a picture of glamour and perfection. Elvis in a crisp tuxedo, Priscilla radiant in white, the two of them smiling like a couple living out a dream. Magazine covers, splashed with headlines of the wedding of the century, told a story of love finally sealed after years of waiting. It was everything fans had hoped for, a dazzling celebration, a storybook ending. But what those photographs didn't capture was the stillness behind the camera, the tension in the room, and the strange, uneasy quiet that settled over a moment meant to be filled with joy. What really unfolded that day was something far more peculiar. The ceremony lasted a mere 8 minutes. Only 14 guests were present, many of whom weren't even close to the couple. Some of Elvis's longest-standing friends, people who had been by his side through fame and failure, were left off the invite list entirely. The whispers started almost immediately. Why such a small crowd? Why such a rush? Why were the people who mattered most to him suddenly shut out? The strangeness didn't stop there. Those who were present couldn't help but notice that the king, usually so charismatic and electric, seemed unusually reserved. He wasn't glowing. He wasn't exuberant. He looked distracted, almost distant. Friends described it as if he were physically there, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. And those left on the outside, like Red West, who had once asked Elvis to be his best man, were more than hurt. They were furious. Something didn't add up. And the real reason for that quiet tension would only come to light much later, when a long-kept secret and 5 heartbreaking words finally surfaced. Their story began in a place few would expect, at a military base in Germany, where a 24-year-old Elvis Presley first locked eyes with a quiet, doe-eyed teenager named Priscilla. She was just 14. Their connection was immediate, magnetic even. And before long, their lives began to intertwine in ways that would raise more than a few eyebrows. By the time she was 15, Priscilla was living under Elvis's roof, worlds away from a typical adolescence. The public, of course, only saw the polished, made-for-magazine version of their romance. Behind the scenes, though, the dynamic between the two was already becoming complicated. Despite the mounting pressure and the growing years they spent together, Elvis seemed reluctant to take the next step. His fans adored the idea of him settling down, and his handlers liked the stability it projected. Yet Elvis himself remained oddly hesitant. He spoke casually of marriage in interviews and joked about it on film sets. But when it came time to make real decisions, he always managed to sidestep the conversation. Some thought he simply wasn't ready. Others wondered if he ever truly intended to follow through. His evasiveness wasn't just personal, it was palpable, casting a shadow over their future. Meanwhile, Priscilla was growing older and growing weary. She had made it clear, in private and in passing remarks, that she wanted more than whispered promises and fleeting attention. She wanted security, recognition, something real. But every time the moment seemed right, Elvis would retreat, focusing on a new movie, a tour, or anything that could delay the inevitable. The tension was quiet but undeniable, building like a storm just beyond the horizon. The more she leaned in, the more he pulled away. And when the tipping point finally arrived, it did so under circumstances neither of them could fully control. Among the few people who truly knew Elvis behind the curtain of fame was Alberta Holman, his longtime housekeeper, cook, and quiet confidant. She wasn't just a member of the staff, she was family. Known affectionately as Alberta VO5, a playful nickname Elvis gave her after a popular hair product, she had been a steady presence in his life since the days of Gladys Presley. When others came and went, Alberta remained, often the only one who saw the real man beneath the rhinestones and spotlight. She knew his moods, his habits, and the private rituals he turned to for comfort, especially the meals she'd prepare when he needed grounding: bacon, hash browns, and black-eyed peas. But on the morning that should have been one of the happiest of his life, Alberta walked into a scene that stopped her cold. Elvis wasn't humming a tune or flashing his signature smile. He was slouched, silent, face buried in his hands and his body visibly trembling. Tears stained his cheeks and the room around him felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Alberta, who had seen him heartbroken before, immediately sensed that this wasn't nerves. This was something deeper, something close to despair. She gently approached him, trying to console him, trying to understand what could possibly be so wrong on such a monumental day. What he said next was quiet, almost whispered, but it landed like a thunderclap. "I don't have a choice." Just 5 words spoken in a low, broken voice that would echo through Alberta's memory for the rest of her life. Not "I'm nervous," not "I'm unsure," but "I don't have a choice." It was a confession, a crack in the armor of a man known for being in control of everything. And in that moment, Alberta realized this wedding wasn't what it seemed. Something had pushed Elvis to the edge, and whatever it wasn't love. Not the kind anyone deserved on their wedding day. As whispers of Elvis's strange behavior swirled behind the velvet curtain of his wedding day, those closest to him began to speculate about what or who had pushed him into saying, "I do." One name came up more than once: Priscilla's father. A strict and protective military man, he had watched his teenage daughter move in with one of the most famous men on earth without a ring, a promise, or legal security. For years, he held his tongue. But behind the scenes, there were murmurs of legal threats, of consequences tied to Elvis having taken a minor across state lines. It was a detail no one wanted to confront publicly, but the implication hung in the air. Pressure didn't always come in the form of persuasion. Sometimes it came with paperwork. Even more unsettling were the rumors that Priscilla herself had reached her breaking point. Some insiders claimed she'd threatened to go public with private details of their early relationship. Details that could have damaged Elvis' career and reputation beyond repair. The idea of such a betrayal felt unthinkable to fans, but the speculation persisted in hushed circles. For her part, Priscilla has always firmly denied these accusations. According to her, any pressure she felt or expressed was born not out of manipulation, but confusion, frustration, and years of waiting in emotional limbo. Still, the timing of the marriage and Elvis's own turmoil raised questions that couldn't be so easily dismissed. Yet when all theories are laid bare, one figure towers above the rest as the most likely architect of the wedding: Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's notoriously controlling manager. Known for orchestrating nearly every public move the king made, Parker was a master of shaping image and narrative. In private meetings, he reportedly told Elvis that it was time to make a decision: marry Priscilla or walk away. But walking away, Parker warned, would leave a stain on his reputation, especially after keeping a young woman by his side for nearly a decade. For Parker, it wasn't about love, it was about optics. And if Elvis didn't want to risk losing fans, media favor, or his carefully curated legacy, there was only one acceptable choice. Even before the last slice of wedding cake had been served, the cracks were beginning to show. Red West, one of Elvis's oldest and most loyal friends, wasn't even invited to the ceremony. It was more than an oversight, it was a gut punch. Red had been there from the very beginning, standing by Elvis through the dizzying rise to stardom, the loneliness of Hollywood, and the chaos of touring life. In fact, Red had once asked Elvis to be his best man. And yet, when it came time for Elvis's own vows, Red was nowhere to be found. The slight was so deep, so personal, that Red walked away from his role in Elvis's inner circle. He didn't just leave quietly, he quit for good. Outside the spotlight, Elvis's wedding day fallout wasn't the only thing raising eyebrows. The press snapped glamorous photos of a $10,000 reception breakfast hosted in a lavish Las Vegas suite, surrounded by executives from film studios, record labels, and talent agencies. Business as usual, except it wasn't. Beneath the polished surface, the man of the hour was anything but celebratory. He posed, he smiled, he played the part. But those who truly knew Elvis could see it. The faraway look in his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders, the sense that he was watching it all from a distance. detached from the fantasy unfolding around him. The newlyweds jetted off on a private plane for a brief 3-day honeymoon in Palm Springs, a getaway that should have marked the start of a blissful new chapter. But even in the desert sun, Elvis couldn't shake what was weighing on him. Reports from those close to the couple suggested he grew more withdrawn, more restless. While the world was still busy celebrating the king's happily ever after, Elvis was already retreating inward. Something wasn't right, and as the honeymoon faded and reality set in, it became increasingly clear. Whatever had been troubling him before the vows had followed him far beyond the altar. Beneath the charm, the swagger, and the velvet-voiced charisma, Elvis Presley harbored a complex, deeply rooted obsession, one that would quietly unravel the very relationship he had worked so long to maintain. Behind the scenes, his ideal of love wasn't built on equality or adult companionship. It was shaped by innocence, youth, and control. He had constructed a world where he could preserve Priscilla as something pure, untouched by the adult realities of womanhood. For years, their physical relationship had been carefully restrained, even strange to those who knew. Despite living together, their intimacy reportedly never progressed beyond guarded boundaries, always stopping just short of what most would consider a normal romantic relationship. But everything changed the moment Priscilla became pregnant. What might have been a joyful milestone for most couples sent Elvis spiraling into emotional confusion. To him, her pregnancy represented more than just impending fatherhood. It marked the end of the version of her he had clung to for years. Suddenly, the dynamic he had so carefully maintained was shifting. Priscilla, once the untouched symbol of youth and softness, was becoming something different in his eyes. The transformation was physical, yes, but more so it was symbolic, and Elvis didn't know how to handle it. In an interview years later, Priscilla would reflect on this painful truth with heartbreaking clarity. Elvis had a hard time dealing with me being a mother and the little girl that I was to him, she said. I didn't know it then, but that's what I realized in later years, that he was a father to me. Her words painted a disturbing portrait of a relationship built less on partnership and more on protection, fantasy, and a skewed sense of emotional guardianship. She wasn't just his lover. She was, in his eyes, someone to shelter and preserve. And once that illusion cracked, so did the fragile bond between them. From the moment she gave birth, Elvis began to pull away. He stopped coming to her bed. The closeness they once shared, however unconventional, vanished almost overnight. It wasn't anger or even betrayal. It was as if he no longer knew how to exist in the same space with her. The transformation from girl to woman, from dependent to mother, was something he couldn't reconcile. And so, the intimacy died quietly. Long before the marriage ever did, what was left was distance, confusion, and the slow, inevitable collapse of a love story that never really fit into reality to begin with. For all his fame, fortune, and undeniable magnetism, Elvis Presley remained emotionally stranded in a space that real relationships couldn't quite reach. He could command a stage, captivate a crowd, and charm anyone within earshot. But when it came to the messy, beautiful demands of adult love, Elvis faltered. He seemed frozen in time, drawn more to the idea of love than its raw reality. Relationships that required vulnerability, equality, and emotional growth often left him confused or withdrawn. He thrived in control, in fantasy, in carefully constructed dynamics that allowed him to feel secure. But real love doesn't follow a script, and when it finally arrived, it rattled everything he thought he understood about himself. The birth of Lisa Marie should have been a turning point, a chance to deepen the bond between Elvis and Priscilla. But instead, it marked a quiet unraveling. With Priscilla's transformation into a mother, the dynamic shifted in a way Elvis could neither process nor accept. He withdrew from her emotionally and physically, unable to see her the same way again. Their home became quieter, colder. The warmth that once lingered in subtle touches and late-night laughter began to fade. Though they remained together for a time, the emotional distance had already taken hold. And from that point forward, they lived more like co-stars in a carefully staged production than as husband and wife. There's a tragic irony that echoes through the story. Elvis married the woman who waited patiently by his side for 7 years, who offered her youth and devotion without hesitation. Yet when the moment finally arrived, he couldn't give her what she needed most. Maybe he never could. The love he offered came with limits, shaped by fear, fantasy, and control. And while the cameras captured a dazzling wedding and the birth of a beautiful child, what they missed was the quiet truth lurking just beneath it all. That Elvis may have said, "I do," not out of desire or readiness, but because he believed he had no other choice. If you found this story as moving and surprising as we did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss more untold moments from the lives of legends. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Elvis truly wanted to get married, or was he pushed into it? Drop your opinions and insights in the comments below, and let's start a conversation. And don't forget to share this video with fellow fans who might not know the real story behind the headlines.